Welcome, Dr. Salgado. Thank you for joining us for our oral history project. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me here, Janet. I'm so excited to be here and share a little bit about my story and hopefully motivate and inspire.
We are ready to hear your story and we are looking forward to it. Well, let's begin. Please share with us about your pre-high school years. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Compton, California, and I lived with my parents in Long Beach for about 2 years, the first 2 years of my life, until my parents bought the house in South Central. I was 2 years old, and from that point on, I was raised in South Central. My family continues to reside there. That's always what I call home.
What elementary school and junior high school did you attend?
I went to Lillian Elementary School. And then for middle school, I went to Edison, which is right, literally, it's all walking distance. And then from Edison, I went straight to Fremont High School.
And what was it like for you growing up as a little girl in South Central LA?
Ay, ay, ay. Can I do a little Spanglish here and there?
Yes.
Fue un poquito de todo, right? And so as a child, part of what really stands out to me was my parents and my community. When you're a kid, like they're your role models. That's what you see, right? And so I was really blessed that I had my maternal grandparents lived with us. So because we had my maternal grandparents, we also had my village. All of my tios, tias, primos, and primas were very much a part of my daily life. And then also just having a lot of trials and tribulations, right? Like whenever there was alguien que venía de Mexico, that was where my house was donde llegaban. Like my house was where people would come and stay when there was something needed. It was my parents that were oftentimes called to be the people who would help and support other family members or other community members. It was also just a time of just so many things and transitions that were happening for my family and personally. As a child, I remember just always being curious. I had a lot of questions as a child. And so I would ask my mom, my grandparents, tons of questions. They would tell me historias de Mexico. Um, but there was just a lot of curiosity for me because growing up in South Central in the 80s, it was a community of immigrants, and also there was a big African American influence, right? So we had that connection. And but there was very much was an immigrant mentality. And although I wasn't an immigrant, I grew up with a lot of the immigrant mentality and immigrant stories. I just remember being very curious about my parents' history, my tios and tias history. And I remember being very attuned to the differences of like economic class differences. And in part, I want to share this because I think it's a really important part of my story is that, my mom, the whole time that I was growing up, took care of a woman and cleaned homes in Orange County in a very affluent community in Newport Beach. And so you can imagine my mom didn't drive on the freeway. She would commute 2 hours. And so part of what growing up in South Central meant was that on my weekends and on my vacations, we oftentimes didn't have childcare. Childcare was the tias, the grandparents, and whoever could take care of who, right? But it also meant coming to work with my mom and doing that commute, sometimes 2 hours. My mom would come on Wednesdays. She'd stay in Orange County at the house as she took care of the woman. I would stay there for like 2, 3 nights, and then we would come back. And I remember the class differences between this affluent, wealthy community and then coming back to my community and being very confused as to why we didn't have access to the same things that maybe her boss or a lot of the people in those communities did. So I was very keen on just like those class differences early on. But growing up at that time just meant like I got to be a kid that was aware, but I also was given the opportunity of just being and really taking it all in, the good, the bad, and the ugly, everything.
Wow. That's powerful that you realized at such a young age, the differences in classes. we don't always realize, a lot of people, say, oh, that, South Central LA is full of poverty, but when you're a child, you usually don't think that, right?
No, you don't. I
Mm.
don't think I was aware actually until other people made me aware of certain things. Like, um, for example, I didn't grow up having really pretty clothes or cute clothes. Like I wore hand-me-downs. And then when we would go shopping, I was just having this conversation with my daughters. We go shopping at the swap meet, and that was like a big deal, right? Like to get something new and to get like new clothes. I thought everyone did that. It wasn't until other people later would introduce me to like a mall or that would talk about like the fancier stores. That I realized, oh, I guess we really were kind of struggling. But on the same by the same token, even though I wasn't as keenly aware of how much we were struggling, I also was aware because my parents were very transparent about how hard they had to work for what we had. And so it was very much like we didn't care if we bought something at the swap meet or the pick and save. Back in the day, we had pick and save. Now it's big lots. Like it was like lo cuidas. You take care of that thing because it cost us $3. And I was very meticulous in how I take care of those things. And my parents just made sure that I understood.
Yeah.
But I never was worried about whether I was going to have roof over my head or food because that was the one thing that was sort of always taken care of by my parents. So that was the part that I never had to worry about.
And who, as a child, you have such a beautiful family. Who did you found that inspired you growing up as a young Latina?
I'm going to have to say mi mama.
Yeah, your mom.
It was mi mama. My mom immigrated to the US when she was 15 years old to come. And at the time, my grandfather was working as a bracero. And, she said, yo me voy con usted porque me voy. And she came and she started babysitting at the age of 15 and spoke no English whatsoever. And I remember always hearing that story and just thinking how powerful my mom was, that she could come at the age of 15. And there was this backstory in her immigration process that I won't go into, but she was alone for a while and she didn't know where my grandfather was. And she was working. And just to think like how a 15-year-old was taking care of children in a new country, new customs, new traditions, new language, and that she was able to make a life for herself and that she was able to sort of have that sureness about her that she was going to be able to succeed in whatever it was that she was going to do. She was, for me, mi ama era todo. Like she was the woman who played Barbies with me, and she was the woman who made Barbie's clothes, and she was the woman who sat and stayed up at night talking to me, motivating me, or sometimes just cooking while I was doing my homework. She didn't achieve more than up to sixth grade education in Mexico, but she was supportive of my journey, whatever that was going to be. And so for me, I just found my mom to be so inspiring. And then, of course, like my dad and my grandparents, to hear their immigration stories. Oftentimes, when we hear about immigration now, we're sort of desensitized to it, right? Because so many of our family members immigrate. But I think now, as a 40-something-year-old, if I had to leave my home and go to another country, how hard that would be for me to learn another language, for me to learn another way of being and everything that we leave behind, right? So I was always inspired by my mom's story and by all of my grandparents and my tios and tias stories. And later I realized how many people in our community share that story with their own unique differences, right? But still, like that story of leaving something behind and making a new life for yourself.
Your mom, such resilience. That's, yeah, we are inspired by your mom as well. Thank you for sharing. Do you remember what it was like in high school for you? Or what do you remember most about your high school years?
Um, you know, I guess I want to share, before I answer that question, I want to say that I want to share a little bit of the struggle as well as the strength and the resilience, because I think people won't be able, our community, students at Fremont might not be able to relate if they don't hear a little bit about the struggle. And so it's not, I want to uplift all of us by sharing this. And so what I really remember is I was not a stellar student. When people see the PhD behind my name, when people see the doctora, people assume that I probably was a straight A student all the time. People assume that maybe I always knew where I was going. And the reality is that I had no idea. And so what I remember about high school is I just was trying to survive, to be honest with you. I just remember middle school was all about survival. Getting to high school was like, oh, I survived. And what I mean when I say I survived is like, I'm all in one piece. My parents were still here. Like we were all sort of just kind of going along, right? But I was not a stellar student. And I remember at times really checking out academically, to be honest with you. There were certainly teachers who I still to this day stay connected to, who I just have so much love and appreciation for. But I didn't necessarily, I wasn't like someone who really identified with being a scholar, student, a nerd. Like I didn't have any one of those identities. I just was. I had a good group of friends. And so what really stands out to me were the friendships that I made during that time. And to this day, I'm still friends with many of my high school. A lot of the people who I'm very close to were my high school friends. And so one of the things that I always say to people is find your cheerleaders, find your crowd, find the people who are going to uplift you all the time, right? Because I found those people. I was very blessed to find those people. And so my friendships, that's what really stands out. The other part that really stands out is that, I I didn't share a lot of what was happening in my personal life and my family life with my friends, or even with my school like support system, like my teachers. So growing up, my dad was had heart problems and had multiple heart attacks growing up. And so I grew up with this idea that my dad could die anytime. And that was sort of the sentiment in the back of my head. And every time my dad got sick, every time something happened, like my fear was like, is this going to be the last time I see him? I would go to school sometimes stressed out because I didn't know, how long my dad was going to be around. My mom had to work a lot. My dad had to stop working when I was in sixth grade. My mom became the primary breadwinner. And so we had financial restrictions. We had a lot of stress. We had a candy store in my house that became part of like my community. And it became my dad's primary way of making income and supporting our family. And so I had a lot of random responsibilities. I wasn't responsible for coming home and cooking for my family, but yo tenía que ayudar con la tiendita. That was part of the role and expectation that my family had of me. And I remember just coming to school and I was a regular kid. And I remember going home and it just felt like it felt slightly different. Like I had all these other responsibilities. Eldest of two, might have a younger sister. And so there was always this sort of like part of me that wanted to be like rebellious and do whatever I wanted, which I did a lot of that. I will wholeheartedly admit, which is part of my life story as well. But I also had my dad and my mom's voice in the back of my mind, right? Like you're a role model, como tú te portas, how you behave yourself is how your sister's like watching you and looking at you, and also feeling very responsible for making better decisions. And so I remember a lot happening during that time of my life, but not talking to anyone about it. I think maybe some of my close friends knew some of it, but not the extent of it all. But I didn't have a path. I did not know what I was going to do. I was not a great student, but I had a good community of people, I think, who really supported me. And that was really invaluable.
Thank you for sharing. What led you to the path of higher education?
The ancestors. I mean, honestly, So let me say that when one of my really good friends, her older sister was at Cal, was attending Cal State LA, and then my friend was applying for college. I was in the Humanitas program when I was in high school. And I remember that was sort of the trajectory, right? Like you were going to go to college, like that was one of the purposes for Humanitas. But we didn't talk about college in my household. It wasn't foreign, but it wasn't an expectation. It wasn't something that it was like, you're going to go to college. And it wasn't because it wasn't a good thing. I think it was just education and learning was valued. But I think there was a little bit of maybe confusion as to what would we actually have access to, given that we didn't have a lot of resources, right? We didn't know about financial aid. We didn't know about loans. Like we didn't know about any of that because my parents didn't own a credit card. So I think my mom still probably doesn't. And so like that was foreign to them, right? So I remember my friend applying for college and then I thought, I'm going to do it too. And you know why I decided to apply? Because my mom cleaned houses and my mom took care of someone. And that was hard labor. I saw the toll it took on her. I saw the toll it took on my family when she had to be gone because it paid okay money, right? For her to be gone and take care of this woman. And, you know, we love this family. We love this. The Allisons are an amazing family and they very much took care of my mom and us, but it was still took a toll on my mom. And so I knew I did not want to do that, but I didn't know what else I was going to do. I had no idea. And so I remember going to the counselor at the time and asking for help. And he closed the door on me actually. And he said, you're not gonna get in. You don't have the grades.
Wow.
I said, well, can I try anyway? He's like, you're wasting your time then. And I felt crushed and I went home and I told my mom and she goes, Mija, apply anyway. Let them tell you no. And I said, I don't know how to fill out this application. I need his help. And she was like, you go back in there and you tell them that you need help. She goes, because I don't know how to help you. And my dad, he's like, I don't know what to tell you. And I think my dad really saw this as you should have worked harder. You should have tried harder, you know, to get that GPA. I think he just felt like I messed up, right? And I was like, I don't know that I did that bad. I think I don't remember what my GPA was, but it was probably like a 2.5, maybe. Um, and so I went back and I said, I need help. I know you're telling me that I'm not going to get in, but I need help. And I got angry and I said, I don't care what they say, just help me. And so I applied and I think it became my reclaiming my power. It became doing this for my mom, for my dad, for our ancestors who had suffered and struggled for so long, right? I felt like I needed to do this. And so it became not a vendetta, but it was certainly something that I wanted to do. And I got into two of the Cal States. I ended up going to Cal State LA. And I can tell you, my first quarter at Cal State LA was an interesting one because I had a lot of remedial classes to do. But I was at that point, I was committed and I did it.
Wow. That's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. That's very inspiring. And we were talking about, we were beginning to speak about college. And so what was that first experience like for you?
It was one of a lot of confusion. You know, sometimes they say ignorance is bliss, right? And to some degree, I think it was. I really didn't know what I was getting myself into when I applied to college. I didn't know the difference. I didn't even know the difference between an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree. Like I remember some of the previous cohorts or years. I knew people obviously who had gone to a community college, but I didn't quite understand the distinction, right, between a community college and a four-year. It was sort of vague. And so I remember just starting college and I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I started, as I mentioned earlier, I started taking some remedial courses for English, remedial courses for math. And I realized I reconnected with my love for learning. I loved learning as a child. I loved reading, but it was something that I just kind of hid away, I think, just to survive. When I started college, I remember just eating it all up. I remember reading everything I could. I remember staying up at night to just understand things. And then it felt very much like personal achievements, right? Like whenever I would get an A in an assignment or in a class, it felt very empowering because I was kind of doing it alone. And so there was a lot of just asking questions, a lot of afraid to ask questions as well. I remember being very afraid of asking questions because I didn't want to sound stupid, because I didn't want to be that one who didn't know. I remember not fully understanding the quarter system, which was 10 weeks long compared to a semester, and just feeling like, oh, this is like the end of my class. Okay, like I get it now. It took me a whole quarter before I kind of got into like oh, there's a rhythm to this. This happens every year. And I remember just really connecting like with some friends and peers, and we all sort of supported one another. Some of my high school friends went to Cal State LA as well. And so we would support one another. We would take classes together sometimes. We would actually talk about our schedules, study together. But I did not have good study skills. And so I had a lot of figuring out to do. And I had a lot of academic growing up to do, because I had lost some of that.
Oh, thank you for sharing. I know many of us felt lost in our first year of college. And it seems to be, deeply rooted in a lot of our stories, how lost we felt and how unprepared we felt as well,
Yeah,
which says a lot about our education system. Or maybe it's the systemic oppression of education that,
for sure.
you know, puts us in those challenges. We're not prepared because we're not receiving the same quality education as someone in a private school setting would be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very,
And thank you for saying that, Yanis, because it is systemic, right? Like it's not, I mentioned, I think my dad at some point he got very disappointed because he kind of felt like, well, why didn't you try harder? But it was so much larger than me. It was so systemic. Like the library, for example, where I grew up going to wasn't a safe library to go to when I was growing up. So my mom didn't like going to that library. I can understand why. This educational system, we had good teachers, but
yes.
I know that they also were undergoing maybe not being paid well enough, not being valued well enough. There's just so much, right? So it's much more systemic racism
It,
than we really realize that impacts us as individuals.
it really does impact us a lot because, our community struggles because of it. Um, and we should continue to fight the systemic oppression that their youth are continuing to feel just as we did, growing up in South Central LA. The systemic oppression is still there. But I pray, and we pray that at one point that all of our schools are receiving the same resources, the same curriculum, the same books, the same money, where it's equality in education for all. And this way we break those barriers of systemic racism that exist so much, for our youth. And our youth are still struggling because we mentor them and we hear their story, and they're still continued, to feel lost like we felt lost during our first year in college. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for sharing. We appreciate it.
thank you.
Yeah. What motivated you to enter the field of psychology?
I think a number of things. I mentioned to y'all that my family, my grandparents lived with us. And so I think because my grandparents lived with us, I had access to our family history, our family stories. I heard my grandma, telling me about her family history, my grandfather, and also my aunts and uncles were coming to our house and sharing everything that was happening. And so I remember at a very early age sitting at the table, because todo pasa en la mesa, right? En la cocina. Like that's the heart and soul of a household. And I remember my grandma, sort of sitting with like problemas, right? The problems that everyday life brings. And I remember just always wanting to figure it out. I was always trying to resolve an issue, figure out an issue. And I'd say to my grandma, why don't we do this? And why don't we do that? What did I know? I was a kid, right? But I was trying to figure it out because I was exposed to all of this and I was trying to figure out a way to fix it. Because I didn't know that it was much larger than even us. I didn't understand at that point how systemic issues and systemic oppressions and racism, how they were impacting all of our family members. So at the time, I just remember always having ideas of how to resolve issues. Simultaneously, I had one of my uncles really struggled. One of my uncles he was involved in a gang from the time that he immigrated to the US. And this particular uncle at some point was involved in some criminal activity, and he became an addict. He started abusing drugs. And I saw the impact that that had on his mental health and the mental health of my family. I saw the impact it had on me when he had thoughts of suicide and when he had thoughts of just not wanting to live, which were very common because at that moment, there were many moments where he just felt like giving up. I saw how it impacted my grandparents, two people who didn't speak English, who were immigrants to this country and were literally trying to figure out how to save their son's life over and over again. And so I didn't quite have the language at the time, but I remember just noticing that my family stories weren't unique. I remember I mentioned we had a tiendita in our household, so everybody would come and talk to my parents and my grandparents. So I got to hear a lot of people's stories. I got to hear a lot of people's struggles. And I also got to hear their resilience and the strength and like how people just continued y como le echaban ganas, the next day in spite of everything that was happening. And so I was curious, and I think both my mom and dad were very inquisitive, and they would always say to me, like, my dad would say things to me like, when you get on the bus, pay attention to people's faces. How are they experiencing life? Like, do you think they're happy? Like, pay attention to like, that person has a story. How is that story showing up, with them this day? So that's sort of the mindset that I had because my parents me inculcaron eso from day one, right? Just always wonder, be curious. And so when I started college, I remember I knew what a psychologist was because my mom took care of a woman who had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and had a psychiatrist and psychologist. And so my mom would sometimes go to those appointments and she would tell me about them. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. You get to listen to somebody and support them in their journey. I didn't think of it as healing journey at the time. I just thought about it as you get to talk to them and help them figure things out. And so one of my first classes was psychology. And I thought, oh, that sounds kind of cool, right? I took the class and I loved it. I loved it. It was fascinating to me. At the moment, I didn't realize how much it didn't reflect like our culture, but I remember it just being curious that it tried to understand human behavior and everything that you could do with an understanding of human behavior and psychology. So I thought about it and I told my mom, oh, to be a psychologist is you have to go to school for 10 years. I asked the professor and it's 4 years of undergrad and then like 6 years to get the doctorate, whatever that is,
Yeah, it's a lot of time.
I didn't even know what it was. So my mom laughed and she goes, pues mija, she goes, estás en este mundo de todas maneras y estás en esta vida, así que you might as well invest in something that you're going to like. Échale ganas. Dream high and see where you land.
That's right.
And so I did. And I did very blindly because even though I was in college, I didn't understand what that was going to entail. Like, I didn't know what it was going to entail. Like, I just thought I'm going to get my bachelor's degree. And then I realized, oh, wait, I have to apply somewhere else. Like, I just felt like it was all going to happen underneath this umbrella. So I remained confused and blind about a lot of things as a first generation college student. But it was really my community. And then once I was there and I started to really think about, why do I want to do this? It was my community. I wanted to do something that was going to uplift our community as Latinos, as Chicanos, as Mexican American, Latinx. I wanted to do something because I felt like we had so many strengths. And sometimes like people didn't see that. And I also saw the struggle, and I saw people like time after time, not only surviving, but thriving, like doing well. And I thought, well, how do they do it? Because according to all these theories, they're saying that we don't have what it takes, but we're doing it. How are we doing it? So the more I got into it, the more passionate I became about supporting and uplifting our community. And that's what kept me going. It was my family stories and our community.
That's powerful. You were definitely led into this direction. This is your calling and your path. And you found it, when you were so young, surrounded by family. It was all around you. Thank you for sharing. We need more, Dr. Salgados out there helping our Latino community, our Latinx communities. Thank you for sharing. Please share with us about your career path.
Well, I should share that after I received my bachelor's at Cal State LA, it was my junior year, so my third year. I decided, okay, well, I guess I'm going to do this. And I decided that I was going to apply for the doctorate. Again, I didn't know that I could apply directly to a master's program, and then from a master's go to a doctorate. I didn't know. And so I applied to a few doctorate programs, and peers, I asked a lot of questions of my peers and some professors, and they sort of gave me some guidance. I decided to go to the University of Oregon in a degree in counseling psychology because it really spoke to what I felt like I wanted to do. It came from a strength-based approach. It was very validating of multicultural experiences. It really talked about understanding the environment and how someone's environment impacted an individual's behavior and people's decisions, etc. So I decided to pursue a doctorate at the University of Oregon, which meant that I needed to move. When I told my parents I was applying, they were like, oh, okay. They were very confused, just as I was. I was only a step ahead of them, right? So I was like, yeah, to pursue this career, I have to apply and get a doctorate and have to apply to other schools. And they're like, but aren't you going to graduate? So then you're not really graduating.
They were trying to understand as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And they were like, so are you graduating? Are you not? I said, yes, I am graduating, but I'm also applying because this is for the bachelor's. And then I have to get a doctorate so that I can be a psychologist. I can't do a whole lot with a degree in psychology. Like I can't be a therapist or do this work. And so they said, okay. And I told them I was applying to Oregon and a few other places. And they didn't seem too concerned. But then when I told them I was admitted and that I was going to go and relocate, then my dad said, wait, what? You're moving? ¿Dónde crees que te vas a ir? And there was just so much confusion, right? And they were very curious. And a lot of my community was too. They wondered if I was running away from something. They wondered if I was pregnant. Like they didn't understand why someone at that time wanted to just leave to another state. And, I said, well, that's where I got accepted. I applied to a few schools and I got accepted to 2 schools. And so this one it looks like it's a really good match. And so I really want to go there. And my mom and dad were very supportive, but also very scared. they were very, very scared. Not only because I was going to be moving to another state, but because, you know, they didn't quite know what the educational system at that level was going to be. That was even more removed from their understanding. At least at Cal State LA, I lived at home and I was going back and forth every single day. You know, going to Oregon, they weren't going to be a part of my path and my journey anymore. And I wasn't going to be there to support the family, support my sister. And so what was that going to really mean? We had a small family, you know, it's my sister, myself, and my mom and dad. At that point, my grandparents had already moved out. And so it was sort of like, this is going to be a shock. But they were supportive nonetheless. And so you know, after once I was in Oregon, I would come home as often as I could to share with them my story, to share with them everything that was happening. I'd call them often, they would call me often, but you know, it was still, once again, I was lost. And when I say this, people oftentimes wonder, how could you have still been lost? Well, because no one really mentors you and tells you at the time. We didn't have programs that really sit you down and say, well, this is exactly what it means to get a doctorate, right? People were at the interview and people were at the orientation asking questions about a dissertation, about thesis. I didn't even know what those things were, and I had signed up for the program. And sometimes when we hear people's story, we think they had it all figured out. I did not have it figured out. I was figuring things out as I was going. And once again, I just had a really good support system. I had really good friends and people who I'm still very close to, who I trusted enough to say, I don't know what this is. And then we would look at the booklet together, or, you know, try to understand things together. I figured out a lot of things along the way, like many of our community does. And it wasn't always, sometimes it was clumsy, admittedly. It wasn't always neat, but I figured it out nonetheless. I had different stressors than some of my peers did in graduate school, but it was part of my journey. Like, I had to work a lot to be able to support myself. And I had a lot of pride. I didn't want to ask my mom and dad for resources because I felt bad asking them when I knew, you know, they were making ends meet and they were okay, but I didn't want to be a burden. And so I struggle sometimes more than maybe I should have. I think had I asked my parents for support earlier, they would have figured out a way. When I did ask, they always figured it out, and they always supported me. But that is definitely part of that career path. It was getting that doctorate. I don't know if you want me to share beyond that.
Yes, you know what? I was wondering because Oregon was the first state. Was that the first state that you travel out of California?
Yes.
And
Yeah, it was my second time on a flight, by the way.
because so I was wondering how that experience was for you, because I remember, you know, my first flight was coming to the United States at the age of 7. So I'm wondering how that was for you, like, you know, your first flight, you know, to Oregon, and your first experience at this university to receive your doctorate degree, what that was like for you.
I felt like a fish out of water. I felt strange. When I went for my interview, I remember that was when I flew to Oregon. And I remember just being in awe with the beauty, but also struck by how different it was. It was when but I still didn't understand it. It wasn't until I relocated and I moved to Oregon right before the fall quarter started that I realized what I was picking up on. And what I was picking up on was that I was one of the few brown people walking around there. There was Eugene, Oregon at that time it still probably is, but at that time was predominantly white. The majority of the diversity that existed at the university came from, and at the graduate level, came from my program. We had a good cohort and a good group of people who were people of color, but the majority of the students were white. there were Mexicans that were raised in Oregon, but they were primarily at the undergrad level. So I didn't interact with them a whole lot, and there weren't that many. And so being in Oregon, I remember just feeling very, very invisible at times and simultaneously visible, if that makes sense. Because Eugene was a place where it oftentimes when people would see me, the question that I would get was, what are you? Where are you from? And sometimes people were being kind and sometimes or curious, and other times people were being rude. I had a lot of that. I remember going to Portland, which is the closest city and that to Eugene, or big city, metropolitan city. And because I wanted to feel a little bit more connected and like I wanted to be more with people of color. And I remember even in Portland, I literally would get stopped in the street by random people and ask me where I was from. And sometimes when I would say, you know, that I was Mexican or Mexican American, like some people gave me like really disrespectful comments, to say the least. And so that was really the first time that I experienced overt racism. It was the first time that my brownness was as noticeable. You know, soy morena, but being in LA, like, and being at Cal State LA, like there were other people who were morenas, so there were people who had dark hair, had wavy hair. But being in Eugene, Oregon, people would try to touch my hair sometimes. Random people would make comments, and I felt very dehumanized for the first time in my life, consistently. Like we all experience those things here and there, but it was like consistent. And yet I remember really just noticing the beauties that it offered as well. Like I love the nature. I love the nature that surrounded me on a daily basis. One of the things that was really helpful for me was connecting with people of color and building those coalitions, because the community, the Latinx community was so small. You know, we needed to connect with other people. So I connected with the undergrads. I connected with like with Mecha. I connected with the African American community, with the Asian community, and we just everything that we could do as a group with the community members, had some really good Latinx community members, just connected with as many people who had shared experiences to survive. So it was very different, and I felt very alone and very, I think I would even venture off to say maybe a little depressed. My first year that I was there, I was very homesick. And I just remember wondering if I had made a mistake, if I had done the right thing. And it didn't help, you know, because sometimes when I would talk to my mom and dad, my dad would say, Mija, si no estás a gusto, come back, you know, and I'd say, I can't, like, I need to do this. But it was very lonely at times.
You found your inner strength in finding communities around you, which a lot of us forget to do. I know some of our youth struggle to fit in. We had a
Mhm.
couple attending schools where they were the only, you know, young women or young men or a person of color. So thank you for sharing that, because I feel like this will definitely inspire them to push through and not give up on their dreams, and to find those communities like you did, to join, you know, a Mecha, or, you know, Latino Business Association, or, you know, to find the groups that they connect with.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
inspiring.
Yeah. And as a graduate student, you know, you don't have those groups. Like I couldn't join Mitcha as a graduate student, but I could build community with those students, right? And I think we get hung up on, oh, but I'm with this. I can't technically participate, or I can't technically do this. At some point it didn't matter. You know, I just wanted to have and connect with other people who had shared experiences. And one of the good things is that when you are in a community where there's so little diversity, is that the diversity that exists, we come together. There's more opportunities to build those coalitions. We knew we were stronger together. And so, yeah, it was always in building community.
Yes, thank you so much. That's very important. Thank you. How do you how do you cope with stress and managing your various roles?
Now, as an adult,
An adult. How did you cope when you were in college? Did you, had you inherently knew that, self-care was important, or is that something that you learned along the way?
oh my God, I'm shaking my head because I think others will be able to relate to this. No, I did not know self-care was important because that was never even talked about in my family. In mi casa, if you said you were bored, they would give you something to do. In my house, like, you keep going and sort of the you just keep going. Like al mal paso dale prisa. That's what my mom would say. Like when you have a lot of things to do, if you stop and rest, you're gonna get cold feet. So you just have to keep going, keep going. And so that's why I asked for clarification when you asked, like, how do I cope with it now versus before? Because I actually didn't cope with it very well as a young adult or even as a college student. Because what I tried to do was do exactly what my mom and dad did, which was work, 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 work. So I worked and then I took 15, 16. I think at one point I took 20 units
Wow.
during one quarter because I was trying to finish in 4 years. That was my goal. These crazy goals that we put in our heads about like what achievement and success needs to look like. And so I say that again because I tell people all the time, like, there's value in some of the cultural resources and the cultural ways of doing things. Like short term, yes, sometimes we just have to compartmentalize and say, keep pushing and get it done. But long term, that same mentality burns us out. That same mentality makes us sometimes quit school. It makes us say, never mind, I don't like this anyways. What's the purpose? What's the use? And so at the time when I was in college, I coped by working really hard. I coped by compartmentalizing. The stressors that I felt from home, I just kind of put them aside and I would just work really hard at studying. And I poured my heart and soul into it because I wanted to get my degree and I wanted to do well by me and my family. And that's all I did. In retrospect, I would have done it different. And my recommendation to others is always like, take a moment, slow down, enjoy the college years. I didn't get involved as a college student, which I kind of grieve sometimes actually. Like I didn't have like I didn't get involved in Mitcha as a college student. I didn't get involved in a lot of like student like campus activities because I thought they were distractions because that was sort of like I felt like I got so distracted in high school and middle school that I felt like, oh, I can't do that here. Because if I do that, then I'm gonna lose focus and I'm just going to waste my time. And I need to get a degree because I need to have a career that makes me a little bit of money so I can survive and do well. That was my mentality. In retrospect, I say I would have wanted to have slowed down. I would have wanted to take a fifth year. I would have wanted to have gotten involved in MedChat, to have gotten involved in some of those organizations where we're having conversations about our stories and we're uplifting each other as we're doing it, not after, right? But as we're going along. I would have liked to had just like taken a little bit of time just to rest more. I had fun. Don't get me wrong. I had fun and I did do a lot of stuff as well. But I was always tired and I think like, oh, like I wish I would have done it so differently.
Yes. Yeah, but we're not taught that, growing up, right, in our communities. We don't even know what
Mhm.
self-care is.
No, no. Like,
None of us can relate to it.
yeah, it was sort of like to this day, I have to tell my mom, stop what you're doing, rest. Like you don't need to keep going because I think part of that immigrant mentality, right? It's like you come here to have a better life and then you work, 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 work as if we don't deserve rest. And that's our birthright. Our elders, our ancestors, everyone's worked so hard. Like, ¿para qué? Right? So now what I tell myself and what I remind my daughters who are really young, I say, like, we need to rest. We need to rest because that's important for our bodies. We need to rest because that also helps us be better people. Like we're less stressed out, we're not as short with one another. And it just because that's important, right? We need to rest, we need to engage in self-care. There's so much I won't go into, but there's just so much value to understanding that our parents didn't work so hard so that we could work as harder. Our parents worked hard to give us a better life. And I think one of the ways that we can honor our parents is by, being good people and making sure that we are not doing the exact same thing, that we do rest, that if we got an education, that means that we should enjoy and really like reap the benefits of education to, yes, have a better life for ourselves, and then even create a better life for our descendants. At some point the lens transitions between, I think when we're young, it's all about making our parents and grandparents proud. And then at some point we have to turn that lens to our descendants and those people who come after us, the generations that come after us. And so I want to be a good elder one day. So I need to take care of myself so that I can be a good elder to my daughters, to my grandchildren, if I have any, and to the future generations. But I can't do that if I burn out.
That's right. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's a really important words of wisdom for all of us to take in and really learn to take care of ourselves. Thank you. How about your career? Can you share about your career path now, your your job as a psychologist?
Yeah, wanted to come back to California, and my goal was to go back to LA. That was always my goal. Life didn't take me to LA, but it took me to a different community. So when I came back to California, I did my internship at UC Irvine. And after that, I worked at Cal State Long Beach as a staff psychologist. I wasn't done with my dissertation yet. And so I did that while I was finishing up my dissertation. And she opened up at Santa Ana Community College. And at that moment, I knew I wanted to work at a community college. I knew I wanted to be in a community college because I wanted to support, again, Latinx community. I wanted to support communities of color. And I felt like that was one of the ways where I would have access. It was important to me to work in an educational system because for me, education was my ticket. That really, education has been my ticket to a better life. It's been my ticket to better health. It has opened numerous doors for me. And so I couldn't quite make up my mind if I wanted to go in community mental health or I wanted to go to academia. And so community college gave me a little bit of both. So it felt like it bridged both. Like I was still working with community, an array of diversity of age ranges, while also really focusing on like individuals who were already in the educational system. And so I worked there for 11 years as I was a tenured faculty. I was there at the counseling center it's not the counseling center, it's psychological services, which is underneath health and wellness. And there I had the opportunity to provide direct services. I did a lot of outreach to the community, both on campus as well as to the community in Santa Ana. And, it's primarily Latinx folks in Santa Ana. And so that was such a gift for me. And I also had to expand my definition of community to include, Latinx in general, because at first I was a little bit focused on just LA. And I was like, no, it's Latinos, Latinx everywhere, right? So how do I expand that? So Santana really afforded me the opportunity to be able to support Latinx mental health, educational goals and attainment through that avenue. There, I also had the opportunity to be a supervisor, and I was really involved in training interns, so individuals who were in their last year to become psychologists. They were in the doctoral internship program. I was the direct supervisor. I was really involved with like the training, providing trainings for them that were centered around social justice issues, that were centered around like communities of color, feminists, how to work from like a feminist perspective. And so I did a lot of trainings with the interns on preparing them to work with our community at the college. And after being there for 11 years for a number of reasons, one of them being flexibility and autonomy, um, I decided to leave a college and that was a really big step for me. I knew for myself that I wanted to do something in the community, and I wanted to do therapy, and I wanted to provide not just therapy, but I really wanted to start something that really promoted wellness more than just stigmatizing mental health issues, but really where we talk about wellness as something that we as Latinx and people of color really deserve. And I wanted to talk about and really incorporate ancestral wisdom, really focus on have a cultural focus so much more that I thought, okay, this is probably my time. The opportunity sort of, I guess las puertas se abrieron because there were some transitions at the college where I felt like I was losing my autonomy. I was being told how to do things. And I think this is important for me to share because, as students, we sometimes think that, oh, once we get a degree, it's easy or the struggles stop, right? Or we have it all figured out. And that's not entirely true. It doesn't matter whether you're a doctor, whether you're working as a teacher, like there's always sort of these moments, right, where we have these pivotal moments with our struggles and where we have to make a decision. And for myself, it was at my 11th year at that college where I felt like I was being limited in how I could provide the support to my community. I was being sort of restricted and I didn't want to lose my autonomy. And so I said, okay, it's time for me to go. And I want to have flexibility to be with my daughters. And this is also important for me to share. And that is that I felt like my mom and dad worked so hard growing up when I was growing up. And there were a lot of times where I didn't see my dad my first few years, like up to sixth grade. I saw my dad very little because he worked so hard. My mom, I saw her a few days a week. She was always present, but she had to work and was gone from the house 4 days a week. And there were days that I wish my mom were home more, so that I could be with her. And I knew that if my parents sacrificed that much, it was so that I didn't have to, and that my children didn't have to. And so when I was told that I needed to be there 5 days a week, 8 to 5, which meant I was going to be getting home at 6 or 7 after traffic, I thought, I don't want to do that. I want to see my children more and I want to be present. I want to pick up my daughters. And I had the privilege, right? I want to recognize I had the privilege because I have a spouse who also has a career, who is very involved in my children's and our children's upbringing. And so I said, okay, I think it's time. So I decided to leave the college and I opened my private practice. I've been in private practice now since 2019. And I recently started Mind Body Corazon, which I'm really excited about. And so this is sort of the beginning of a new journey for me and a new chapter where I'm figuring out once again, I'm figuring it out as I go. I don't have all the answers, pero me aviento nonetheless, because that's what everyone before me has done. And so here I get to work with amazing clients. I work with the community, providing direct services. I'm also an adjunct faculty at Pepperdine at the Aliento program that focuses on training individuals how to work with our Latinx community from a therapeutic standpoint, MFT trainees. I get to supervise them and I get to teach them on how to do this work. And we co-create what wellness can look like, with our community. And so I get to have my hand in a couple of different pots, but at the end of the day, it's all in the community. Whether I'm doing workshops directly for the community or whether I'm providing direct services or whether I'm providing training for trainees and supervising, it's all in service to our community. And so there's moments where it feels very easy and natural. And then there's moments where, again, I kind of go, how do I want to do this? What do I want to envision? And so I'm still envisioning, I'm still creating, but it's been a fun journey so far.
That's wonderful. We are so proud of you. When you were sharing your story, I just have visions of all the young men and women that we've been honored to provide scholarships to, and that we've had the opportunity to mentor. And I just heard them through you, if that makes sense. Because they're still living the same plight or the same fight that we lived. And it comes first circle, right? And that first circle comes into everything that you're sharing, and all your work is so important, because those are the things that are going to break the walls, they're going to break the barriers, that are going to break, systemic oppression, is to teach our Latinx communities how important it is. The whole concept of self-care, the whole education aspect is very important as well. It's important that we continue to push for our dreams and our goals, and to fight for our education, which is very, very important. It's very important. So we thank you. So, and this is all for all the young men and women that we've read essays for these past 10 years. And your story is in their story. So thank you. I just have one or two more questions for you. And one is geared towards the student population who doesn't have a family, that is walking alone in their path. And I was going to ask, what advice would you give to the young student who has no familia and is pushing through in this world all on their own, like your mom when she came here to the United States?
I would say find people who will uplift you. Find people who will support you. I know that a lot of people, it's very easy to sort of stay in this place of like doing it alone, right? Because that sort of becomes what you know. That's also survivor, right? Mentality. It's like, I just need to do this alone. And so I would suggest find your tribe, find your cheerleaders, find those people that will support you no matter what. I tell people all the time, I say this jokingly, I say one of my really good friends, her name is Judy. I say like everybody needs a Judy, and everyone needs, because she has had my back from the moment I decided to do this and leap in, and she's a friend, right? Who is now like a sister, right? Like I think about the chosen family. I would suggest find yourselves individuals who support you. Find people who share similar goals to you and people who understand where you come from. Oftentimes we're very much we get very, very connected to maybe people who are like us in terms of where we come from, which is really great. And we forget that we also need people to help us get to where we want to be next. So find people who share similar goals. There's a dicho in Spanish, dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres, right? Birds of a feather flock together. I've not always loved or been a fan of that dicho, but there is some truth to it when it comes to achieving goals and doing something that's very different. Is finding those people who are already there and finding people who you can go along that journey so you don't do it so alone. And when it gets lonely, if you do still find yourself alone, I want you to connect with something that really grounds you, whether it's thinking about who you are culturally. What are the strengths of your culture? When I think about the African American community or the Latinx community, there's a lot of strength in our communities. And so even if you don't have a physical family that supports you, think back to those individuals and how they have surpassed and survived and have thrived. Think about all their struggles and how they got through it. See what lessons you might be able to get from that. And sometimes we need to do a little bit of research. Maybe it's reading in a book, maybe it's listening to a podcast where you hear a mentor, where you hear somebody who has a similar story. Connect with those people, even if it is on a spiritual or on a distant level. Like find those people who might guide you. They don't always have to be physical individuals. And I get that I'm coming from a place of privilege. I did have a family. And so I get that your challenges will be different. But there's still a lot of wisdom that you can connect with, just connecting with ancestors, connecting with your culture.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Any other words of wisdom you would like to leave us with? Anything else you want to share?
Yes, my biggest suggestion, I've already named a couple. I think one of the biggest things that I would share is that there's going to be moments that are going to feel really challenging. There's going to be moments that will make you question your path and that will make you question whether you really want this. And just know that that is part of the journey. It's okay to question. It's okay that sometimes things are difficult. Some doors will close. Find a window. Find the window. Find that little bit of a door that's kind of partially open and push it through. And if there's moments where you feel like you can't, take a step back, rest, collect yourselves, ground yourselves in who you are as a person. Connect with the reason why you decided to pursue whatever that is, and then keep on pushing. Not everything comes easy. And I will be the first to tell you that systemic oppression and racism, sexism are constantly operating on a daily basis and that impact us on a daily basis. But I will also be the first person to say that you have power. Every single one of us has power as individuals. Connect with that power that you have within. Connect with those strengths. I oftentimes, and when we talk about trauma in my field, we oftentimes talk about how trauma is passed down often from generation to generation. I am here to remind you that so is wisdom. Wisdom and strength is also passed down from generation to generation. We have our elders and our ancestors' wisdom. We have it within us. And sometimes we can't connect with it because there's too much noise around us. Take some time and just have some minutes to yourself, whether it's alone time, reflective time, journaling. Connect with who you are and why you're doing something, and let that guide you in that process.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We appreciate your time that you've given us today, and your presence and your words of wisdom. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here today. Thank you for making me feel comfortable and sharing my story. And I appreciate everyone who's listening. And I am not physically in South LA anymore, but I am an email away. So if I can be of support, I also want to be of support to our community in whatever ways we can be.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you and all your work. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.